everyone. I welcome you all to the monthly current affairs roundup session for the month of April, where we look into some of the most important issues of the month gone by. To begin with, let's look into the recent discovery of proto-historic settlement of artisans discovered in Asuralai village of West Bengal. The archaeologists of the University of Calcutta have unearthed a large number of microlithic tools as well as minute bone and crystal drills which are used for making different varieties of beads of semi-precious stones. The initial estimate of the settlement could be about 3500 years from the present times, and among the excavated findings, there is also a large amount of black and redware pottery which signifies a proto-historic level of human occupation. Along with the black and redware, large quantities of other contemporary pottery such as redware, blackware, and buffware have also been found, and there is also evidence of high temperature burning and charcoal deposits at the mud floor of this site. Some of the unfinished beads and drills further suggest that the craftsmen working at the settlement were not only making these artifacts for local consumption but also exported the same. Another interesting fact about the site is the legend associated with it, like the local villagers believe that the mound was associated with demon Bakasura who was killed by Bhima as per references in the Mahabharata. Given the significant findings of the site, it is very important from the examination perspective, and please go through the relevant chapters in art and culture. Similarly, a prehistoric rock art site dating back to Neolithic civilization during 1500 to 2000 BC in the Guntur district. The latest discovery highlights the dexterity with which early human was able to engrave different animal motifs like fish, snake, peacock, bull, etc. on limestone blocks. Apart from the recent discovery, the region was also synonymous with the flourishing of Buddhism, where a stupa was unearthed by the Department of Archaeology and Museums in 1960. Also, during the excavations, a series of Satavahana inscriptions were also discovered, which are now placed in the Amaravati and the Guntur Archaeology Museum. Given that prelims is just around the corner, these two findings are very important from the examination perspective, and I request you to go through the monthly magazine for further details. Now let's look into some of the important events with respect to General Studies Paper 2, that is Polity and International Affairs. The first issue which we'll look into is regarding the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act. The Supreme Court laid down several guidelines to prevent misuse of the said legislation and to protect honest public servants as well as innocent citizens from vested interests. Further, the court mandated a preliminary inquiry before booking a person under the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act, as well as upheld the right to anticipatory bail for the accused. This judgment was seen as impingement on the rights of the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes, and a nationwide bandh was called by various civil society organizations supported by various political parties as well. During the bandh, there were violent protests in many parts, which resulted in loss of 9 lives, and both the central as well as state governments were caught unaware by the scale and intensity of the protest. The central government, post this tragic event, filed an urgent review of the judgment of the Supreme Court, which was turned down by the apex judiciary. Even though the judgment of the Supreme Court is the immediate trigger, the perception that in the social environment, where the legal and administrative system is already loaded against the vulnerable communities, the verdict like this may further worsen the fears of the vulnerable sections. In this regard, even though the judiciary has tried to balance the protection of innocent against harassment with that of upholding the rights and dignity of the oppressed classes, what is now needed is a re-examination of the entire question by the court in a calm and conducive atmosphere. With that, let's move on to the next issue regarding the new set of draft rules released by the Union Ministry for Environment, Forests and Climate Change under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. The new rules have lifted the ban on cattle trade as well as various other cumbersome regulations which were issued previously, like the one based on distance where the cattle markets could be set up or was prohibited 25 kilometers from the state border and 50 kilometers from the international border. This is a welcome move as the previous rules were criticized for restricting even legitimate animal trade and interfering with dietary habits of people due to the cumbersome paperwork and procedural requirements, which was seen by many as the ruling party's furthering of the cow protection agenda. Also, the ban imposed earlier was a non-starter because regulating livestock trade was essentially a state subject, and many states had protested against the center's move to ban cattle trade. In this regard, the new guidelines issued, while removing the curbs on the sale of animals, also retains good provisions in the earlier notification aimed at barring cruelty in the treatment and transport of animals. This is a welcome step as even the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act recognizes explicitly that animals can be used as food for humans, and good governance is not only about regulating human and economic activities but also avoiding perceptions of sectarianism. Because, as we know, most of those employed in the cattle trade are either from the minority communities or those who constitute the most vulnerable and poorer sections of the society. Given the rising incidence of cow vigilantism, which had resulted in violence against these poorer sections, the new guidelines are a welcome move as was long demanded by various activists across the country. The next important issue of the month was Fugitive Economic Offenders Ordinance, which defines a fugitive as someone who has left India to avoid criminal prosecution or who is already overseas and refuses to return to India to face the law of the land. As we can recall, the finance minister, while presenting the budget of 2017-18, had said that the government was looking at a law to confiscate the assets of such persons accused of economic offences till they return to face the law. A draft bill in this regard was introduced in the recent session but could not be passed in the parliament, leading to the promulgation of the Fugitive Economic Offenders Ordinance. Along with this, the banks have also been asked to mandatorily collect passport details of those individuals borrowing above rupees 50 crore. These measures are needed because many like Mr. Vijay Mallya, Lalit Modi, who are accused of foreign exchange law violations, and the latest Punjab National Bank scam carried out by Nirav Modi and his associates, have all defrauded the country's banking sector, and the Indian government is no closer to getting these individuals extradited to India due to the ongoing lengthy extradition proceedings going on in these countries. In the case of the Punjab National Bank scam, although the government has attached the assets of the accused in India, an American court has disallowed the sale of their assets in other jurisdictions, citing that India is yet to pass a model law for cross border insolvency cases. In this regard, the government has to present a coherent vision about its plan to bring back those fugitives who have already got away and plug the remaining loopholes in the system so that such events can be prevented in future. With that, let's move on to the next issue regarding the recent decision of the central government to revoke the Armed Forces Special Power Act in Meghalaya as well as reduce the application of the act to certain areas in Arunachal Pradesh. The act, however, continues in the whole of Nagaland, most of Assam, and some areas of Manipur, thereby providing the security forces total immunity from prosecution. As I have already discussed before, the Armed Forces Special Power Act gives a wide-ranging powers to security personnel in disturbed areas declared either by the central government or the state government. By virtue of the powers granted under the Act, the security personnel have the powers to arrest without warrant or even condemn someone to death without the fear of judicial prosecution for their actions. Due to such powers granted, there were instances of arming excesses in areas where it was in operation, which led to the demand for withdrawal of this act. However, the central government is far from abrogating the act mainly because the army favors its continuance. But the Supreme Court had ruled that the armed forces cannot escape investigation for excesses committed under the act in the discharge of duties even in disturbed areas and ordered a probe into specific cases in order to fix accountability for human rights violations in disturbed areas. The government too is considering a proposal to make AFSPA more operationally effective and humane, and in this regard, the Justice Jeevan Reddy Commission, which was constituted in 2005, had recommended the repeal of the law altogether and strengthening of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act to tackle insurgency in disturbed areas. Therefore, it is time that the central government consider the recommendations of the Jeevan Reddy Commission in order to humanize AFSPA, if not revoking it altogether. The next important issue was the judgment delivered by the special court sentencing Asaram Bapu to imprisonment for the rest of his natural life. The judgment comes at a time when sexual offences against women and minor girls are being reported on a regular basis, and the verdict of this sort reinforces public trust in the judicial system by holding the powerful and influential accountable for their actions. The court convicted the self-styled godman not only for the sexual assault but for betraying the trust of his followers. And given the massive support such self-styled godmen enjoy in India, the state government concerned had to be on high alert and massive police deployment had to be done in order to prevent any violence which we witnessed after the sentencing of Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh last year in a rape case. In essence, Asaram's rise and fall is reflective of the lives of some of the self-styled godmen of our time who consider themselves as the guardians of India's age-old spiritual tradition. This is a much debated topic and we can expect a question on this in the mains examination. The next important issue of the month was the relaxation of the coastal regulation zone norms proposed by the central government. The new norms have made the coastal areas more accessible to tourism and industrial infrastructure and have given individual states a considerable leeway to decide how they should plan any such development in these coastal areas. Some of the changes proposed include allowing of ecotourism activities such as mangrove walks, tree huts in identified stretches subject to permissions, where the coastal zone rules of 2011 declared CRZ1, which is the most ecologically sensitive area, as a no development zone except for defense and strategic purposes. Further, the new rules introduce subdivision within the CRZ zones and has limited the application of CRZ rules to a land area between the high tide line and 50 meters on the landward side of creeks, estuaries, backwaters and rivers, while the coastal zone rules of 2011 apply to a land area between high tide line and 100 meters on the landward side. Environmentalists say that the new regulations have been framed without a transparent public consultation process because the report of the Sailesh Nayak committee, which was set up to reconsider the limits of the existing coastal zone regulations, was initially not made public by the Environment Ministry. On the international front, there were many developments in the previous month, of which I'll discuss some of the few very important from the examination perspective. The first one was about the Rohingya refugee crisis. Rohingyas are the Muslim minorities of Myanmar from the Rakhine province who are refused citizenship of Myanmar by the government authorities, terming them as illegal Bengali immigrants. The persecution of this community, both by the Buddhist majority as well as the Myanmarese army, had created a humanitarian crisis resulting in more than 7 lakh Rohingya refugees fleeing the country and taking shelter in the neighboring Bangladesh. This had put huge pressure on Bangladesh's resources to accommodate these fleeing Rohingya refugees, and the two countries were said to have reached an agreement to repatriate the Rohingya Muslims back to Myanmar. And recently, Myanmar has claimed it had repatriated a family of 5, which has been rejected by Bangladesh and has further demanded the international community to put more pressure on Myanmar to create conditions for their eventual safe return. Because, as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees has recently pointed out, the conditions in Myanmar are not yet conducive for a safe and sustainable return of refugees, and more needs to be done than just setting up the physical infrastructure in terms of legal status and citizenship of these refugees in Myanmar for them to move back to their country of origin. If that was the crisis in our immediate neighborhood, there was another which was in news, and that is the invasion of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq brought an end to decades long dictatorial rule, but the country is still fighting the ghosts of the destructive war. The war, which began in 2003, had no legitimate basis as well as no UN mandate, but was founded on misleading intelligence information of the then Iraqi government possessing weapons of mass destruction and accused of having ties with Al Qaeda. Citing these two reasons, an international coalition was formed by the US along with the UK to intervene in Iraq, but both these claims turned out to be false later because the occupying troops failed to find any weapon of mass destruction in Iraq, while Al Qaeda in Iraq was actually formed after the invasion. Further, the post war management of Iraq was disastrous, starting with the disbanding of the Iraqi military, leaving tens of thousands of soldiers jobless, thereby posing a significant security threat. Also, there was no coherent strategy to stabilize the post Saddam Iraq or to address the sectarian power struggle to fill in the vacuum created. The years which followed has raised questions on what the US and its allies achieved from a war which killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and displaced millions, thereby providing a fertile ground for terrorist organizations like the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. To summarize, the war on Iraq left the country in a worse and much more dangerous situation by exposing the sectarian and ethnic fault lines and pushing the country in disarray and perpetual violence with no accountability of the Western countries for their actions. In this regard, the Iraq War will always remain a reminder of not only one of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes, but also a grave failure of the international system. With that, I am wrapping up this session. Do share this content if you like it, and please refer to our website for the April monthly magazine. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.